Hello and welcome back to Guitaries, or if you're new here, welcome to Guitaries. I'm Reese, this is my guitar, we are Guitaries. We are the combined entity known as Guitaries. So this is a video about scales, but it's not going to be a strict scale video, like there's not going to be heaps of theory. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. I'm not looking to overwhelm with a bunch of information about scales. The reason I'm making this is that when I was learning guitar, when I was trying to memorize the fretboard, ultimately, to learn everything on the fretboard, I feel like the information I found online was quite disjointed. Like, it wasn't just... There's no, like, big picture video, it felt to me. Like, there wasn't just a centralized... And I'm sure there are, like, hour-long videos about scales and stuff out there, right? But I'm going to try and make it very simple. I'm going to try and get rid of some of the overwhelming knowledge. It can be simplified into one big pattern, essentially, in a series of smaller patterns, and we're going to go over what I mean. And yeah, you too can unravel the mystery of the guitar neck and just learn as much as possible. You don't have to be trying to be a rock star to want to learn about scales and learn about what the neck's made of, and how to navigate the neck. And this is one of the biggest tools. So, along the way when I was learning guitar, I felt like a lot of the information online was either vague or in short little snippets or portions, and I guess maybe it's like algorithmic maybe, or too long. But I'm someone who likes to know like what the whole picture is, like how big is the cliff that I'm standing in front of before I start climbing it, right? Like, I feel like the videos were teaching me where to put one foot on a rock, and I'm just like, but what does the cliff even look like? Like, am I going to be climbing for a year? Am I going to be climbing for an eternity? Who knows? Something I'm going to do in this video is compare scales to language a bit, because I think they're quite similar. But you're not going to need to know note names for this. Although I think it is important to know note names, and I would recommend trying to learn note names, or trying to like memorize where the notes are on the neck, you're not going to have to do this to understand and practice scales and to visualize the scale. Yeah, and play the scales. You're not going to need to know the note names specifically. Often when I would watch scale videos online, guitarists default to quite technical language, but it doesn't need to be that way. I wonder if it's like they've just gotten so used to talking about it that way that that's just how they talk about it. Or, I mean, there's kind of this thing online too where it's like, if you talk about it too simply, maybe you don't know or something, right? But I'm not worried about all that. Also, if you can hear a lawnmower in the background, somebody's mowing their lawns here. Okay, so before we get into some scale pictures and some scale ideas I have for you, and to make some things clear, I want to debunk some scale myths. So often I see a lot of talk about feeling versus technical knowledge when it comes to scales. Like, people will say, "I just play with feeling." You know, I don't want the technical knowledge. I don't want to learn too much information. But in fact, you can express your feelings better, or express that feeling, right? What they're talking about, playing through a guitar better with more knowledge. And scales is an obvious thing with it. Oftentimes they're talking about the pentatonic scale, and it's like they've just learned it to some level and they've decided that's the way to express feelings. But just like language, more words is going to help you express the thing. Like, oh, I'm sad, right? Or like, the depths of my dark despair know no bounds. Like, more words are going to make you more poetic, right? It's going to sound cooler if you can play better stuff and more complicated stuff to express a feeling in a cooler way. The next thing is, people will often refer to scales as scales, like I am now, right? And they're actually kind of referring to like a plurality of things, like many ways to play scales, I think. But all that a scale is, defined by Google, is a collection of notes that produce a particular overall sound, a direct way for a player to decide how they want the music to sound and feel. There's like 7 notes in a key, and they repeat up and down the neck, right? So, like, scales made dumb, you can play one note, for example, and it's just contextless, right? Like, it's like saying the word cat. It's just cat. It's just nothing. One word, one note. But if I want to add context, I can add a second note, right? Or, right? So suddenly you've got like a direction. It's coming down, or it's going up. It's like adding a second word, cat, black cat. And then consider like a sequence, right? So there's a little more context to say black cat, but what if you said the black cat went to the shop to buy some milk? Well, now you've got a heap of context. Now you've got meaning, right? Same with a scale. So when we say notes in a scale, we're talking about the available notes you can use to say a thing, to say a sentence, to express a feeling, to express something in context. Okay, well, it's not a lot of myths, but it's something. And some more myths we'll encounter as we go through the next section of this. Not really myths, just debunking some of the difficulty and the vague ways that people talk about it. Okay, so here we have 3 scales. We have B minor scale, A minor scale, and G minor scale. These, by the way, are their relative majors. We'll talk about those at the end, but I'm keeping the theory light for now. So, suffice to say, the B minor scale contains the exact same notes as a D major scale. If somebody says to you, I want you to play in D major, aside from the nuances of playing notes in a certain way, you'd be playing the same notes as you'd play if someone said they want to play in B minor, just in a different order, perhaps. Okay? So the first thing to notice is these are all the notes on the fretboard for these scales, right, of each one. 1 to 12, 1 to 15, actually, but here's the 12th fret. And, I mean, if you're watching a scale video, you must already know the notes repeat after the 12th fret. If you don't know, here's these notes here at 1 are the same as the notes at 13, right? The pattern's going to repeat. So here's where it gets interesting. So here, I've put a square around a particular pattern of notes. See in B minor here, there's the red square. Now that pattern is the same physical pattern, so different notes, they represent different notes, but the same physical pattern for your fingers as here in A minor. You see that? It moves down. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Moves down. Next key down, G minor, the same pattern. Okay? This dark blue note here is the minor root. So this is like your classic minor scale. Except that, again, the notes repeat all over the neck. So any of the notes in B minor are part of the minor scale. It's just the order you play them in. But what I mean to show here is the same pattern is across all keys. Okay. And here is another example. So this might be a major box. This is your root note of your major here at number 10. But look at the pattern. These pattern notes repeat here in the next key down, right? See, it's the exact same physical pattern. And here in the next key in G minor. So what I'm trying to show you with this is if you learn the scale pattern once from one key, you know the pattern for all keys. They just move. A final interesting example of this. Here's a pattern at the bottom. And in the next key down, it jumps to the top. You see? And then begins to move down again. I chose 3 that are descending on purpose. But as the whole scale moves down for each key, it's like a ribbon that wraps around because it repeats on 12. So when you change keys between B minor and A minor, this pattern at the bottom is now going to be your pattern at the top or at the very bottom as well. But for example, you change to G minor, it's going to be here at 10. So once you know this box and you know how to find it in a key, you know every major and minor scale there is, or the patterns to play them. And I hope that makes it clear because the notes repeat in these chunks. So like I was saying earlier, to know the cliff you stand in front of, right? To know how many letters there are in the alphabet, there's as many as is in 1 to 12, or 0 to 12 scale pattern, and they change for each key, but not the order of the physical pattern. Once you know the order of the physical pattern, you can play a scale, technically, in any key. So, how do you go about memorizing the scale pattern? Now, this might not work for everyone, okay? But for me, I'm someone that likes to brute force the knowledge and memorize it with just intense repetition. So, I'll show you what I did to memorize it myself for the first time. So this one is A minor, by the way. And here's that first box I showed you. See, it's around number 5 to 8 there. So here's your pattern in the middle. So, how do you go about practicing this for memorization? The first thing I would do, and you can just pause this video so this color coding makes sense, but is split it into chunks of no more than 3 notes. And this is to go up and down the guitar, like sorry, what I should say, from the lowest E to the highest E, right? And this is literally these chunks of 3 notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you do it with this chunk, and you do it with this chunk, and you do it with this chunk, and you see the chunks overlap, right? Because when you learn the overlapping chunks, then you're learning the chunks from each other. And these notes have sounds, right? So as you're doing this, you're hearing the sound go up and down. You're paying attention because you have to focus on putting your fingers in the right place for the pattern. Like I say, if you're somebody that already knows notes, can't hurt to know which notes you're playing as you play through here, but it's not necessary, at least not at first. It is definitely useful. As I always say, the more information, the better you're able to express yourself, but this is blunt memorization. Okay, here's some in-between chunks, right? So you might do these chunks with the open neck. Up and down, up and down, up and down. You might do this chunk. This is a set of 3, they're quite wide notes here. You'll find there's some repeating notes. Same with this. It's all about getting your fingers moving in as many ways as possible while you're focusing on the pattern that you're playing. Because as you focus on it and play it with your fingers, it's just like going to imprint on your mind with raw repetition. Here's another way to practice that looks more complicated, but focus on the red boxes. Focus on the red boxes first. See these set of 6 notes? So as you move to the next string, they literally repeat. This is due to the structure of the guitar. Same thing on the next string, but they move up by 1 note because of that tuning difference, right, with the G string. But see the pattern repeating? Over here I've highlighted a more recognizable pattern of 2 notes. This is the exact same notes repeating diagonally across the neck. This is another way to practice them. You want to be practicing them like this direction, and diagonally. And honestly, the way you end up playing is much more diagonal than up and down, although up and down still has its use, and across still has its use in songs. Here's another pattern that repeats. But this is about breaking down the structure of the guitar, demystifying, hopefully, the guitar structure. So what looks like a big complicated mess of notes is actually a pattern that repeats and repeats. And once you practice that pattern over and over and over, in as many different ways as you can, you'll just get better and better at doing it. Okay, so final things to talk about here to do with scales. The first thing is it can be useful to play along with a metronome. I've got a metronome here. One, because it'll teach you to stay in time, obviously, when you're playing scale notes. And 2, if you increase the speed, I know not playing fast is not everything, but if you increase the speed, you can create a kind of artificial necessity for yourself, right? Like forcing your brain to adapt quickly makes your brain think it has to memorize the notes. And I promise you, making it a little bit faster in that way will make your brain uptake it so much faster. You're just doing it to yourself at that point. Also, you can make up any patterns you like to memorize a scale, right? Like the point of this video is, for me, to show the size of the cliff. And that, for me, the way that I went about learning the scales was brute memorization, was repetition of patterns over and over, up and down, up and down, up and down, until I couldn't escape it. And eventually it becomes very natural and intuitive that your fingers begin to do the pattern, because it repeats, all over the neck as you move. In the last song I wrote, there's a cascading bit, and it looks like it's like practiced, but it seriously is just, I'm so used to the pattern that I just played this part backwards and decided to keep it. And that's what it was, but there is ways of practicing that. But eventually the pattern becomes much more clear to your brain. And something I always think about is, you know, when you go to speak, so the scale should be thought of as like the alphabet, right? Chords are going to be your words, and I'm going to make a video about arpeggios and how to most easily picture those as well, because chords and arpeggios are really your words and saying sentences. But you know, when you go to speak and you don't have to think about the word you're saying. Right now, I'm just saying the words I want to say, right? But have you ever tried to say a word in a different language? You know, whatever. You have to think about, at first anyway, right, before you become fluent, you think about your word. Oh, I want to say hello. Then you think about, like, the French word, bonjour, say. And there's a gap. And so when you go to say it, though, you'll be like, hello, bonjour, right? You translate. There's a gap. That happens with scales at first. That's the feeling, right? Well, which note is it? Is it? Oh, it's not that one. Oh, it's that one. That's what I want. But that gap between thinking about what you want to say and saying the word that you want to say, or making the sound that you want to make, gets shorter and shorter with repetition. And that's when it becomes intuitive. Right? And eventually you just think the sound and your finger will trace it. So all I mean to say is, if there's light at the end of the tunnel and light at the top of the cliff, if the analogy is going to hold, it is that every time you practice, that's going to get closer and closer if you focus on the sounds as you practice. And then as a final recommendation, yeah, practice all the ways you can. Make up your own patterns, skipping one note, like I was before, right? So this last one is expert level practice mode. This is a technique that I used to use a lot. I don't so much anymore, so we'll see how I go. This is sets of 5 notes, skipping one note in between each, and then going up one note at a time, up one set of 5 at a time, going right the way around and coming back down. So I'll show you what I mean. This one I still find quite hard. You see what I mean? Alright, if you've made it this far in the video, thanks for sticking around. Please like and subscribe, and any suggestions or ideas you have. If you think I'm wrong about anything I've said too, feel free to go ahead and correct me in the comments. I appreciate your time.